Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
And I'm Ann Judge. The Whole Pineapple is a podcast about wellness focused around fertility. We'll talk with experts on a wide range of topics, including nutrition, stress relief, sleep, mental health, etc.
And we'll dig into the issues that can cause fertility challenges, like PCOS, or early menopause, or cancer treatment.
So if you're curious about your fertility, whether you're ready to start a family,
or you're preserving your options for the future, let's dig in.
Welcome to The Whole Pineapple. I'm Ruby Boris.
I'm Ann Judge.
And today we have a really interesting, terrifying, trying not to be overwhelmed by it already kind of topic. But first, Ann, I have a question for you.
Okay, all right.
Bear with me because it's a long one, okay? What do BFRs, PCBs, BBP, DEHP, DEP, DNHP, DES, BPA, DDT, lead, cadmium, chloropyrifos, atrazine, and PFAs have in common?
They are probably all things lurking in my body already that I have consumed, whether or not I was trying to.
I know, they sound like monsters, but they are what we call endocrine disruptors. And we are talking about endocrine disruptors today and toxins. And we are welcoming Natalia Grob, and she is double board certified in OBGYN and reproductive endocrinology and infertility. She joins us today from Denver, Colorado. She practices with Conceptions Reproductive Associates in Colorado, where she uses evidence-based medicine to enhance fertility naturally with diet and lifestyle recommendations. You can find her at Natalia Grob _MD on Instagram, where she posts regularly on fertility, myth-busting, environmental toxins, diet and lifestyle, and positivity. Natalia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Maybe.
I know. I'm super excited because I think Ruby and I both go to a lot of conferences, and there's almost always some sort of talk on this, and you just walk away from it feeling like you need to go home and throw away all your pans and just like, how are you supposed to live in a world that is so scary?
I was saying earlier today that I feel like I want to build myself a bubble, but it has to be a glass bubble because it can't be plastic.
No plastic bubbles, yeah. No bubble wrap, no plastic bubbles, just glass.
I'm going to have my own little garden in my glass greenhouse bubble.
I know. I was for cooking. I really love the foil that's like the coated and the nonstick, and then they stopped having it at all the grocery stores. I was like, oh, it's probably because it's really bad for me, and that's why I probably shouldn't be buying it. But it worked so well to get stuff off, and then I discovered you can still buy it on Amazon. So I bought like 4 boxes, which I am still using to cook. But I'm sure by the end of today's talk, you'll probably talk me out of it. I do know in general that the reason that things are nonstick is also not good for our bodies.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Natalia, where should we start off? This is such a big topic, and we could probably go in a million different directions.
You know, I think it's important because, as you mentioned, it is really easy to get overwhelmed at multiple points of talking about endocrine disruptors and environmental chemicals. So I thought I'd just start off by saying that a lot of the words that I'll be using today, I use interchangeably. So I think, you know, in general, like on my Instagram, I will talk a lot about environmental toxins. But from a medical perspective, the proper word is actually endocrine disrupting chemical. But that is a lot more of a mouthful when you've got limited word content for Instagram and social media, which is why I use toxins a lot more. So if you hear me interchange endocrine disrupting chemical or environmental toxin, I'm really talking about the same thing. So specifically, endocrine disrupting chemicals are chemicals that interfere with how our bodies work. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that these chemicals are everywhere, that the majority of these chemicals were put into use and widespread use throughout the United States without ever making sure that they're safe. And it's really up to us as consumers to make healthier choices.
When I was doing the research for this episode, I had the 1970s came up a lot. It's like this started to be widely used in 1970 in the 70s, and then by 1978 it was banned. It's like, oh, excellent. And then I saw this stat that said in the past 50 years we've seen declining sperm counts, earlier puberty, and genital malformations in people and animals, kind of broadly. And then at the same time, the annual global production of plastics, which contain endocrine disrupting chemicals, has grown from 50 million tons in the 1970s to 300 million tons today and continues to increase. And then science is now seeing the connection between these changes and what we're seeing in the reproductive system and fertility. And then I went down a rabbit hole and now I'm really scared.
I mean, you have to laugh because otherwise I'd be crying. But I mean,
Right.
it's totally true. So, I think the best way to kind of like set the scene to help patients and consumers understand where we're at is that the best example of endocrine disrupting chemicals that I always start off with is that when lipstick was first marketed to women in the United States, they've realized that if they added lead to the lipstick, it made the lipstick taste sweet and that women would use it more. And so it literally, they were adding lead, which they at that time already knew that was associated with birth defects and profound medical complications. They added it because seriously, it made people buy more of it and use more of it. And that's just unfortunately how the cosmetic industry is set up right now and how the consumer market is set up in the United States. But you have to show overwhelming burden of harm and not safety first, and then put the product out there. So it is pretty terrifying when you look at it in that term.
That seems very backwards.
We're part of this huge experiment right now because the regulations are so different in different countries. And so you do feel like 25 years from now, there'll probably be some pretty clear research in terms of what was allowed in one country and not the other. But for right now, as consumers, what do you tell people? Like, what is a good place for people to start if they're concerned about the disruptors that they're getting in their environment?
It's hard because you don't know where to start. And I personally went through this journey on my own. So I have been involved in research with endocrine disrupting chemicals for about 10 years now. And it's just recently, like this year, that I decided to figure out what my actual endocrine disrupting chemical exposure was. So I did an at-home collection kit through Million Marker, where for 24 hours, I logged all the different products I use, whether it was deodorant, face wash, lotion, hair shampoo, like all of it. It was a really easy thing to use. And then I got a readout back of what my chemical exposures were. And I don't know, I think I live a pretty darn healthy life. Like I don't eat fast food. I cook most of my food. I use glass Tupperware. And so I was really surprised when I had many chemicals that I came back positive high levels of exposure for. And I was like, me? Like, I feel like I should know better. Like, I was really hoping that they'd be like, you have the lowest levels of chemicals we've ever seen.
Yeah.
We've ever seen. You're like so pure.
Yeah, you're so pure and healthy. Look at you, girl.
You and Gwyneth Paltrow could be friends. You can just sit together and...
No, but I mean, instead, it showed what the population data shows. The population data through NHANES shows that the majority of people in the United States, it's actually one of the few studies I've seen, it shows 100% of us have detectable levels of these chemicals. And so, yes, I mean, I'm unfortunately part of the 100% of us. But I did show, what I thought was really empowering about this process is that I saw which chemicals I had high exposure to. And then the company I did this testing through actually found which of the products were contributing to those high levels of chemical exposure. And so then as you go to the store and you need new deodorant, they had a list of approved ingredients that were healthier alternatives. And so I've just, every time I need to buy new toothpaste, I look through there and I'm like, okay, I'm going to find an even better toothpaste choice. And so it's been slow and steady, but yes, at many points I've I freaked out.
Well, what led you to first start working and researching in this area? Did you have some sort of personal pivotal experience or just reading about things? I mean, so related to what we do in reproductive endocrinology, but it's still a little bit of a side area. I'm just curious what got you interested in it.
I've always had, that's a great question. I really haven't thought about it for a long time because once I got in it, I was like, of course I'm going to keep doing this. This is like, I really care about it and I'm passionate about it. I think it was really early on in residency, I started asking questions about how our environment impacts egg health. Like, it's not fair that some people who have really unhealthy lifestyles and do all the wrong things have no trouble getting pregnant. And I was struggling to conceive, and I was like obsessing over the fact that I bought the non-organic strawberries, and I'm like, that's why I didn't get pregnant this month. Like, that's why.
Yes.
And I just was like, there has to be something here. Like, what am I missing? And so I actually started off by asking a question using a large population database, the NHANES database. And what I showed in that study is that the women that were exposed to the highest level of these environmental toxins actually went through menopause 2 years earlier than women who had lower levels of these chemicals. It was terrifying because, as we know, tobacco smoke is like one of the worst things you can do for your fertility. You go through menopause 1.5 years. But the chemicals that I was looking at were even a bigger effect than smoking tobacco. And so I think that's where I started being like, wow, this is something that we don't talk about enough in our field. This is something that OBGYNs need to know about. This is something all of us need to know about.
Yeah, for sure. The OBGYNs are another place that this is super important because you're literally growing a human and this is their first exposures. And they did a study on fetuses and on babies and the amount of chemicals that they're already exposed to before they're even born.
Yeah, so I think that I've read that study. They did it by looking specifically at cord blood, but also like placental tissue. And so what they saw is that, everything that mom is exposed to, baby's exposed to, that those exposures, in utero exposures, can impact generations to come. Meaning what mom is exposed to in pregnancy is going to impact her children and her grandchildren through epigenetic phenomenon.
Yeah, I think about that a lot since some of the early epigenetic research was looking at, famines or natural disasters, things that kind of cut off a population and made them be different from the other populations, and how the same thing, you see that in their grandchildren, you still have heart disease and all this kind of stuff. And then again, you realize we're not only living this natural experiment, but it's not just about us. It's something that it seems like it's going to be very hard to roll back the clock on, because even if we try and make changes for ourselves, if we already have children, they're already also in this world. And it's just, again, it can make it all seem so overwhelming. And I guess I really like your idea about being able to start by looking at your personal exposure and then trying to think about small, actionable changes.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit that it's easy to get overwhelmed and feel like doomsday, like we're all exposed, why even try?
Right.
But I really want patients to look at it in a different way, in that we have a choice here. We get to choose how we show up in this world. Do we want to be living our healthiest life, or do we just not have the space right now to consider making these lifestyle changes? And so for many patients, they find environmental toxins because there's something going on in their health that they want to optimize. So obviously for me, it's a lot of patients who have, infertility or pregnancy loss, but some people get really into this because of other conditions like cancer or, diabetes or obesity. So there's lots of different reasons why people consider looking at their environmental exposures. And so I really use this as an opportunity to say, there are some things we can't choose in medicine, right? Like you can't choose who your parents were, or whether or not they pass a certain gene to you that increases your risk of developing a disease. But we get to choose which consumer products we expose ourselves to each day. And it can be an empowering process, which is ultimately what it ended up being for me.
That's such a great point, because we've talked in many episodes about infertility and that loss of control and how frustrated it all is. And so even though this can seem really intimidating, it is one area that you do at least have the ability to make choices and educate yourself and feel like you're doing everything that you can to maximize your chances.
Yeah. And as a consumer, you have a voice too. it may not seem that you have that much input or that much sway for these big companies and that are creating these products. But the more people that are saying, hey, I don't want this in my product, or I'm concerned about this, and they don't buy those things, that does change the industry too. So it really does make a difference if you are paying attention to what's going in and on your body and in your home. And I was just looking at some different ways that you can look up those things while you're, especially with cosmetics and stuff. And I don't know if you're familiar with the ewg.org Skin Deep website. You can look up different products and see what kind of chemicals, if they have a safe profile or not. And then I just saw, and I haven't checked it out, so I don't know, but there's an app called Think Dirty, Shop Clean. So Think Dirty, Shop Clean. And it's basically, you can like scan barcodes and it can tell you the safety rating, their own like little algorithm for the ingredients that are in there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Are there tools that you often recommend to your patients?
In general, I have like a top 10 list that I kind of go through with patients about how to minimize their exposure. And yes, using all those apps and online resources is a great way for patients who are ready to do a deep dive. And that's great. But for me, I think a lot of my patients are overwhelmed and don't know where to start. And so I kind of talk about big picture topics of things you can do to limit your exposure. So one of the first things you can consider doing is just make sure you wash your fruits and vegetables before you eat them. And it sounds so simple, but it's one of the ways you can eliminate your exposure or reduce your exposure to pesticides. And so the other thing to consider is to store all food storage items to be made out of glass containers. So instead of storing your food or heating up your food in plastic, use glass containers or like a glass water bottle. Another thing I tell all my patients about is reducing their exposure to fragrances. So fragrance is basically a bogus term that means we added whatever we wanted to make it smell nice. So we don't actually know what's in fragrance other than we know that it has lots of endocrine disrupting chemicals in it, like phthalates. And so if you're ever looking at something like a candle or air freshener or even some cleaning products, if they have fragrance added to it, you want to eliminate using those in your house. Other things I talk to my patients about are, simple things like always take off your shoes when you get in your house, because any toxins that you've been exposed to throughout your day, if you then bring them into your house by putting shoes on, it's a simple way you can reduce your exposure.
So you mentioned some of the early research. Can you talk a little bit more about studies? I know a lot of animal models have been done, kind of what is some of the science that we have in terms of how these things are actually impacting the body?
There have been quite a bit of both studies in animals as well as more population-based studies. And in general, the data is very clear that as a population, our puberty, our age at which we start menstruating, that's become earlier. We also know that fertility overall is decreasing globally. We also know that the age of menopause is starting to happen earlier and earlier, and that we also see an increased risk of adverse pregnancy complications. And all these things can't be explained by genetics alone. And so there is something shifting in our population. And that's where I really think we have the opportunity to potentially change by making these changes with exposure to environmental toxins.
Yeah, not only for our population health and our reproductive health, but also environmental health. It's like a big circle. So if we are taking care of our planet and our environment and our wildlife and our oceans and all of those things, that's going to come back to us as well. So as much as we would like to think that it's not all that connected, it certainly is.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are common misconceptions that people have about endocrine disruptors? Are there a lot of things that you find yourself having the same conversation about with your patients?
Yeah, I hear this all the time. People are like, but I bought the BPA-free version. Like BPA-free is like the biggest marketing scam out there, because when it says BPA-free, it means that they're still using something, but it's even less studied than BPA. And so it's not like the alternative to BPA. Like I think if they're using BPA or BPS, that actually might be more carcinogenic than BPA, or it could be even worse for our health. And so I think people think that these labels of like BPA free or, a safe sticker, means that they don't have to think about things, but it's disappointing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the term natural on products. Like it's all natural. It's like, well,
what does that even mean?
Yeah, and same with natural flavoring. If you ever see that on a label, it's no good. It's something that's added, that's usually artificial, and probably you don't want to know what it is.
Exactly. Great point.
And a good example, well, a terrifying and sad example of endocrine disruptors that we found out the hard way about is DES. So historically, that is something that we still see. We are kind of getting out of the offspring directly affected by it, but certainly is something that's on our questionnaires. Like, was your mother exposed to DES? So can you talk a little bit about what that is? Because patients probably have seen it on some sort of questionnaire at some point.
So DES they gave to prevent miscarriage, and then of course it was associated. They found that it was associated with specifically birth defects in their kiddos, like uterine malformations, as well as a type of uterine cancer in female kids that were born to moms who used DES. And so that is absolutely a great example of an endocrine disrupting chemical where, again, they never made sure it was safe before they started using it routinely.
And I saw that a stat that there is 85,000 man-made chemicals in the world, and so many of them we come into contact with every day. I think it was a story on NPR. There's this gentleman that was talking about plastics, and he says, try to go a day without coming into contact with plastics, and or go through and count the amount of times you come into contact with plastics throughout your day. And it's like immediately when you roll over and pick up your phone or whatever, it's just like unreal how many times we come into contact with these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in terms of specific chemicals or specific letters, like some of the ones that I threw out at the very beginning that people may have heard about, what are some common things that they might see on labels to look out for?
So, I, in general, kind of like what you were saying, where I try and make sure patients know that a lot of this is marketing techniques. So things that are labeled healthy, natural, BPA free, those aren't necessarily going to be your best option. I really try and avoid those words, products with those words, but I also try and avoid products that have fragrance added in it.
And let's break it down a little bit more for listeners, because when you come to speak at the conference, you're speaking to a group of health providers. But for people who are listening, I mean, what does it really mean if something is an endocrine disruptor? Can you explain what that means in terms of how the endocrine system, big picture, works in the body and all the different ways that can influence things?
Our endocrine system is basically, to summarize, it's how our hormones talk to one another and keep our body working. There are lots of different parts of our endocrine system. Sometimes it has to do with our metabolism and our weight. Sometimes it has to do with our thyroid. And in my field, it has to do with reproduction and how the brain and reproductive organs communicate. And so if you have an environmental or external toxin that is interfering with the communication that's in place in your body, it can lead to problems with your endocrine system and ultimately your overall health.
And we can then absorb endocrine disruptors in many different ways, right? It's not just about what we consume. It's also about what we're touching, other things that we're being exposed to just in the overall environment.
Yep. So it's about what we eat, but also the products that you're applying to your skin every day, like sunscreen or lotion, and also the things that you smell. So, if you're using a fragrance, like one of those plug-in fresheners or burning candles, that's another way that you're exposing yourself to environmental toxins.
And when it comes to nutrition and food, oftentimes it's the processed stuff, correct? So it's the things that come in containers or have multiple ingredients that were put together to make this food product. So in general, big broad strokes here, the more whole that you eat, the less likely you are to come into contact with those man-made things. However, there are pesticides. So when it comes to produce and whole grains and fruits and vegetables, things like that, of course, they're going to have more nutrients and be better for you than something that is processed. But then we also get into those pesticides and herbicides. And you had mentioned that washing your produce is a very big step to getting rid of some of those pesticides. But a lot of patients have asked me, is it super important to buy organic? Like, how much does that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have gone down that rabbit hole too, because I personally can't afford to buy everything organic. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, do I really need organic Oreos? Why is this an option at Whole Foods, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So in general, I follow the EWG has like a list of dirty dozen. They talk about the fruits and vegetables that are most likely to be exposed to pesticides and at a higher concentration than other fruits and vegetables. So things that are sprayed that you're not going to eat, like the outer shell anyways, then those things aren't as important to buy organically. So I'm just making something up, but let's say like bananas, where you throw out the peel, or pineapple where you're throwing out
pineapples.
You're not eating the whole pineapple.
Yeah.
Those are ones that you could potentially save money and consider buying conventional or not organically grown. But the alternative is, you think of these things like blueberries, strawberries, things that are on the ground and are just sprayed everywhere. Those are things that you could consider spending the money to buy organic as well.
I think I read somewhere that when they're growing potatoes, they basically have like one potato that they put all the chemicals in and they let it like seed out to protect the rest of the potatoes.
Oh, gross.
And that's the reason that you
gross.
want to buy organic, because if you got that one potato, then you're getting like a
You got the potato bomb of chemicals.
Yeah, and I don't know but ever since reading that somewhere, now potatoes and sweet potatoes are one of those things that I do always buy organic.
You're like looking at it and like, did I get the one? Oh, that is so disgusting. Oh my gosh. Just when I thought I was doing so good with my sweet potato for breakfast this morning. Oh man.
And being a mom as well, like I think that's part of what's so overwhelming about this is we worry not only for ourselves or not only when we're trying to get pregnant, but then you see these little people and you can't control what they're doing in the world. Like, what do you do in terms of thinking about your children? Like, what are the things that you're really trying to change in their environments?
Yeah, I think it's really about figuring out how I want to show up as a healthy parent. And so I actually went through my house one night after my kids went to bed, and I threw out anything that was highly processed. I just threw out or donated things that were highly processed. Like, I try and in general to eat healthy, but then I had a few packets of ramen in there or like instant potatoes. And I was like, I don't need these, right? Like this is not a good choice. So I actually decided to go through a deep dive, and anything that had complicated ingredients in, pre-made salad dressings, I just discarded it. And so since then, I'm really only allowing things back in my house that I'm conscious about. And so, yes, sometimes my kids complain because their friends went to 7-Eleven and had a Slurpee and got flaming hot Cheetos, the blue kind, which I didn't even know there was a blue kind, which is even more disturbing.
Interesting.
And yes, so sometimes my kids will be exposed to that, but I don't keep it at my house. And so I tell them like, yeah, you can try it, see if you like it. But my job as your mom is to expose you to lots of healthy food so you can make your own choices.
Were they surprised when they came downstairs after the purge of the artificials? Were they ever like, where is the blank? Or did they not really notice?
They didn't notice.
Yeah. Did you go for all the plastic toys too? Or?
Oh no, girl. I should, but one battle at a time.
It's so hard.
It is. I had a friend where her friend's baby shower, her partner had gone down the rabbit hole and was like, only wooden, all natural toys and this and that. And they gave us this very specific, I think everybody just gave them gift cards because we're like, never mind. I'm too scared to buy you a baby gift.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to picture, like, what if they have, like, 3 toys? Because, like, how many wooden toys are there?
Not a lot. Their kid got bored. And then it was this whole drama because when he was out of town, she took the kid to, like, McDonald's just because, and they played in the play place. It was, like, all the toxins all at once. And then she was like, I'm not going to tell my husband. So... But again, I think that's part of it when you're talking with patients, too. You're trying to do the best you can. We live in a very... scary world for many reasons, and short of Ruby's glass bubble out in nature, like we can't completely eliminate our risk, but I think at least thinking about what we're most exposed to on a daily basis, I think that's a really great idea, and where we can make those small changes that are really going to add up over time.
Yeah, so it's important to know what you're putting in your body, on your body, in your home, but also, what impact you're having on the environment.
Do you have any sense of scale and time? Like if you had a person that was trying to really like overhaul their lifestyle a little bit in terms of fertility treatment, is there some amount of time after making this change that you think it takes before you see a difference? I mean, I know that's always people's big questions, like, well, if I'm trying to work on my health, but every month is important to try and get pregnant.
I just say do it concurrently with your fertility treatment, because I can't possibly estimate the impact of positive lifestyle changes compared to how your ovarian reserve and egg health is going to change month to month. And so I just tell patients, do the best you can each day. You don't have to be perfect, but make healthier choices, and eventually that'll add up.
Yeah, progress, not perfection. Like none of us are perfect, and every day is not going to be perfect. So you just have to do the best you can.
Because I have had patients who I think delay fertility treatment. They're like, I need to go on a big detox and a health retreat. I think part of that is fear. Like they're worried that the cycle won't be successful. And so the more that they try and control everything else before they actually start a treatment cycle, they don't have to worry about whether it's going to work or not yet. So I like that idea that it's something you do all at once.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Speaking of detoxing, if you Google detox from endocrine disruptors or anything really, detox prior to fertility treatment, oh man, everybody out there, please don't Google this, and please don't ask your provider about this. But I get so frustrated with the detox marketing, because is there really a way besides to stop your exposure to detox your body from these things?
No. And that's the thing. It's a huge marketing scam, right? Like the major way to reduce your exposure to environmental chemicals is avoidance first. Your body will do the rest, meaning that your body can process these chemicals, your body can excrete them through your urine or other ways of metabolism. But you don't need to buy a $300 cleanse to have really expensive vitamin packed urine. Like it's just a waste of
it's so colorful and pretty though. You're like, wow, that's all the toxins leaving my body. I can tell because my urine turned color.
You don't need a vitamin shot and a colonic.
Oh wow. I personally don't. No, but I think, yes, it would be easier, right? Like that's our American culture that, instead of losing weight and starting to exercise, I'd rather take a pill and do that. That's kind of where we fall into the trap with environmental toxins too. I just want to buy like a toxin cleanse and say that I've addressed it. It's a lot harder to actually do the work and make healthier choices, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, we don't have a reset button, unfortunately.
What if I wear a magic copper bracelet? Is that going to block the toxins too?
Are you making fun of the fact that I have bracelets on?
No, I know.
I was like, I'm pretty sure these aren't copper.
Okay. But just it is crazy the things that you see being sold and marketed, because again, we feel out of control and we want something that not only do we want to feel more in control, but ideally we'd like to feel it easy. And you're right, it's not easy, and that's the hard part.
Yep, exactly.
We talked about the people studies. Did you want to say anything else about mice? I know you started with mouse research.
Not really.
Not really. That's good. No, I always feel bad at conferences. And then I remember at one conference, the speaker was talking all about like why they always use mice for things. And I mean, there's so many reasons, but also he's like, mice always get pregnant. Like they just do. They're pregnancy. And so if you can change something and see that even mice aren't getting pregnant, then you know that there's really something going on to keep researching further. So.
Or if you're in Florida, it's alligators. I did see that when I was doing my research on Endocrine Society, there was a blurb about a study with wild American alligators in Florida exposed to DDT-like pesticides that caused genital and reproductive malformations, a phenomenon that was later seen in a variety of animal species.
Wow. We were just in Florida this last week, and my husband and I went for a run along the water, and the signs just kept getting scarier, because first there's a sign about alligators, and then it was like toxic rocks. And we're like, ooh, alligators and toxic rocks together.
Toxic rocks.
We got to get out of Florida.
Yeah, get out of Florida, man.
Toxic rocks. You can't even see. Now I'm not even safe in the forest. There's toxic rocks.
Is there anything else you want us to, anything else that you want to get the word out for that you wish people understood about this really important topic?
I can't think of anything else that we haven't talked about other than just to refer people to my Instagram. I have a lot of highlight reels that kind of help walk patients through things they can do, as well as my personal journey in reducing my exposures to chemicals.
That's a good question too. So once you did this and you started kind of working, Were there any things that you found surprisingly harder to give up than others? Like, what was the hardest part for you?
I have some favorite makeup that I'm still trying to find replacements for. So like I replaced my mascara, and then I think I'm like on mascara number 4, and I just haven't found my one yet. And then same thing with like skincare products. I found one good sunscreen, but it feels a little greasy. I don't know. So I'm still working on it.
Oh, that's so hard. Yes, because you find your thing, and the thing that you've like, however many years you've been wearing makeup, you found those things, the ones that you've been wearing for years and years. And
when they say that a lot of us kind of plateau with our hair and makeup in high school, because that's just when we start doing it, and that's why we keep doing the same things. So the things we were using back then are also probably even less safe than the things that are being made now.
Totally. It almost seems like when you have your favorite makeup products and you find out that there's something in them, it's like almost like betrayal, because they're like your best friends almost. Like, oh no, well, now what do I do? And mascara in particular, that is a tricky one to find something that works for you. So you said it was Million Marker that you used?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll have to consider whether I'm going to do that or not. Is it going to be good or bad for me?
What about some of the other products that say they can test for chemical exposures, either in like urine or stool? Or
I haven't done them. So I've only done the Million Marker one because it was really easy, and it was a simple interface. And I like that they gave me suggestions for which products to replace my current products with.
That is nice to have some suggestions, because otherwise it's like, well, start fresh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for Dr. Natalia Grob for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. I think you've done a really great job making us feel informed, but hopefully a little bit less scared by the fact that we can make changes and we can at least see what's really in our daily consumption and have some good steps to take to try and cut back.
Thank you so much for having me on and talking about the whole pineapple.
Thank you so much. And I feel a little bit more in control, a little bit less, still terrified, but now I feel like I have some actionable things I can do.
That's just kind of the world right now. So here we are.
Totally. Just a baseline state of terror for us, just scared all the time, but trying to work with it.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Whole Pineapple Podcast. We hope it was helpful.
If you know someone who could benefit from hearing the podcast, we hope you'll share it with them.
And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review The Whole Pineapple on your favorite podcast app. Every rating and review makes us easier to find.
This podcast is sponsored by Seattle Reproductive Medicine and is produced by Audiotocracy Podcast Production. We'll see you next time. Have a delicious week.